Behind every amazing flavor is an amazing human who has perfected their craft. Welcome to Flavors Unknown, a behind-the-scenes look at new flavors and the chefs, pastry chefs, and bartenders who create them, with your host, Emmanuel.
I am your host, Emmanuel Roche. Thank you very much for listening today. Every other week, I interview chefs, pastry chefs, and bartenders to discover their secrets behind the scenes.
Today is episode 19.
And as usual, you can find the show notes at flavorsunknown.com. Click on the episode page.
Have you been to Austin? Next time you are there, you cannot miss the big gray-blue glass building in the middle of downtown. It is the Fairmont Hotel. It is the tallest building in the city. It's not surprising, in fact, for the largest luxury hotel in Texas. And today, my guest is the executive chef from the Fairmont Hotel. His name is Andre Natera. And I have to confess that I was a little tense the first time I met Chef Andre Natera, as I knew he wanted to be originally a professional fighter and that he was overseeing more than 100 people and several food and beverage programs at the Fairmont. But Chef Michael Fautéger from Olame, you can listen to his interview on the episode 7 of my podcast, told me that he was in fact a great chef and a true gentleman. And indeed, I spent more than 2 hours with Chef Andre Natera, and this is one of the nicest person I ever met, who was open to talk about anything. This episode is a great one, where you will discover what it takes to work at the kitchen of a great luxury hotel. Chef Andre Natera talks to us about collaboration, leadership in the kitchen, and even he's going to open slightly the veil of the dark side of being a chef.
Welcome, Chef. I'm really excited to have you on Flavors Unknown. I'm excited that you have some time, to share with us.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So when we talk together, you share with me that as a young adult, you almost made it as a professional fighter. So what compelled you to switch and become a chef and not pursue a professional fighter career?
It's funny. If you ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I still to this day, I would probably say I wish I was a professional fighter. It was just something that I enjoyed very much as a youth. I boxed when I was young, wrestled, did martial arts and various other things. But there was a certain point where I was basically at a life crossroads. The gym where I used to train at, and there was a lot of professional fighters in this gym, and the coach that was there came to me, a really, really famous fight coach. His name was Sekson Janjira. He was a world champion in Thai style kickboxing and has a good stable of fighters that have made it to the UFC and other kickboxing tournaments. And he asked me, he said, "Hey, I'd like you to turn pro." And that was a moment where, around the same time, I was also offered my first head chef position. I really had to look at things and really had to analyze where I was at in my life and say, what do I want to do? Do I want to be a professional fighter, or do I want to pursue this career of being a chef? So in speaking with other fighters at the gym, asking them, what do you make? What's your salary like? And keep in mind, this is years ago. So what the fighters are making today in professional organizations was nothing compared to what it was around this time. And so I was talking to a friend of mine who was fighting in the UFC at the time, and I asked him what he was making. He's like, $6,000 or so a fight. And he had 3 fights. So I was thinking, that's only about $18,000 a year. And I was asking him about benefits, and he says, no, if he gets hurt, he's on his own. And I thought, that's tough, right? $18,000 a year, no benefits. And I was talking to another guy, and he had broken his leg in a fight, and he was a fireman, and he lost his job over that because the fire department didn't support his fighting career. So at the time I looked at it, I said, okay, I could make a lot more money being a head chef, support my family, have medical benefits, and really be a responsible adult is what it boiled down to, is I needed to be a responsible adult. So I decided to pass on the professional fighting career and pursue the professional chef career.
So you made a wise decision, early on.
I think so. I mean, I was pretty good. Looking back on it, I probably wasn't going to be the next Conor McGregor or Oscar De La Hoya, whoever was popular at the time. I was pretty good. I don't know if I would have been the next superstar, but it was definitely a passion of mine.
So how did the competitive sport prepare you, for your chef's role? And do you see any similarities between like the sport, like locker room and the kitchen?
Yeah, definitely. So what's interesting about gyms is the same thing that's really interesting about kitchens, and that's there's a certain social hierarchy inside the locker room or in the training room, and that same social hierarchy applies also in the kitchen. So you have the chef at the top, and then you have his sous chefs, and then the really chef de parties, and then the commis after that. Well, the same thing sort of applies that hierarchy in the gym, right? You have the head coach of everyone, and everyone's very respectful and kind of walks on eggshells around the head coach. And then he has his professional fighters and his amateur fighters, and then the people that are just starting out. So the hierarchy kind of works the same. And the way that it works is, if you're giving crap, you only give crap down. You're not allowed to, speak negatively up. There's a lot of that same mentality in kitchens early on when I first started out. So it was really easy for me to kind of fit in when I first got into kitchens and kind of respect that type of atmosphere and respect the hierarchy. And back when I started cooking, so, keep in mind, I went to culinary school in 1995. So it was a little bit of a different era. And there still was a lot of that locker room style mentality and
the style of humor were the same as well.
I would say so. It was a different time, and being a cook back then, being a young cook, I kind of saw like, okay, I know how to fall in line. I know how to fall in line in the kitchen because it was the same way I needed to fall in line in the gym. And it was respect the hierarchy and just like in the gym, it's it's yes coach, and in the kitchen it was oui chef. Same thing.
Oui chef, in French.
Yep.
So today you oversees like the whole food and beverage programs at the Fairmont Hotel in Austin. So which is like the largest luxury hotel in Texas. And you told me as well, like the largest hotel in Austin.
That's correct.
For the listener, can you briefly describe the different food and beverage concepts at the Fairmont in Austin? Because it goes from the raw bar to fine dining experience, at the Garrison. So you have a whole spectrum of offers when it comes to food and drinks.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. So the first one that I'll talk about is Review. So Review is our multi-dining concept, which has an eclectic menu where you could order off our Asian kitchen. You could order out of our Italian kitchen. We have a raw bar. We have a dessert station. And so in our Italian kitchen, we're making pizzas from scratch, making our pastas from scratch. In our Asian kitchen, we're serving, a couple of different varieties of ramen, some different noodle bowls, Taiwanese beef noodle, udon noodles, fried rice, okonomiyaki. And then, of course, we have the raw bar where we have shellfish towers and seafood dishes. And then you could order French crepes and things like that. So that's all one restaurant. So it's a dynamic restaurant where it's great for the hotel traveler, and for the convention business, that people that come in and say, I don't know what to eat, and I'm in the mood for Asian and I'm in the mood for Italian. Well, we could both agree to kind of meet in the middle and get what we want out of this restaurant. So Review kind of covers all of that. And behind Review, so it's like Inception, right? So restaurant within a restaurant. You have Garrison. Garrison is our fine dining restaurant, which really is the whole menu concept is built around fire. So we have a wood burning grill, we have a smoker, and many of the menu items are designed around those flavors. So everything from grilled bread with an avocado butter to grilled meats, grilled seafood. Everything kind of has an element of either smoke or char or grill or something like that. So that's Garrison, which is a phenomenal dining experience within the hotel. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit more exclusive. We also have Fulton, which is our lobby bar, where we focus on small bites and a really creative cocktail program. We have Good Things, which is our grab and go coffee shop. Of course, we have in-room dining. Our in-room dining is unique, where you're staying in the hotel and maybe you want to spoil yourself. Obviously, order breakfast in bed, and then you have the chef come up and serve you caviar and truffles, because we have caviar and truffles on our breakfast menu as well. So that's fun. So if someone wants to get away for the weekend and have enjoy some perfectly soft scrambled eggs with shaved black truffles, we could do that. And then on our 7th floor, we have Rules and Regs, which is our bar on the 7th floor, which really focuses more around interior Mexican flavors. So it's fun for me as a chef because I have a creative outlet, whether we're talking Latin American cuisine, whether we're talking high end, whether we're talking Asian or Italian or, raw seafood. I have my hand in a lot of different things, which keeps me engaged and interested in, and it keeps me creative.
So we'll come back to the creative approach, covering all those platforms that you have. But thinking about, the people listening, and everyone knows very well chefs at restaurants and celebrity chefs on TV. I don't think that people know a lot about chefs working at a hotel like yourself. So what would you say are like the top, let's say just focus on three, because I'm sure there's a lot, but the top three main differences between being a chef at a restaurant versus a chef at a luxury hotel like the Fairmont in Austin?
Well, for one thing, and again, this isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions to the rules on both ends, right? But for the most part, if you're the chef of the restaurant, you oversee your menu, for the sake of conversation, 15 items. And those 15 items, you put your heart and soul into, and you could work through them. But what you get is you get really good at these 15 or so items. And in a hotel, there's a lot more moving parts. So what you're exposed to is, it's an exponential amount more of different types of food items that you're exposed to, because one day you're making Mexican food, the next day you're making barbecue, and the next day you're making Thai food. In addition to that, the different concepts that you may have in restaurants and things like that. So you're just exposed to a lot more, I would say, in a hotel than you are in the restaurant. And of course, there's always exceptions to the rule. Another big difference, I would say, between hotels and restaurants is, when I worked in a restaurant, we ended up closing our restaurant, which was, it was a traumatic experience. And I think when you work in a hotel, you have a little bit of comfort as a chef knowing that the doors are not going to close, right? So there is a little bit more security in the job. The pay is a little bit better. The benefits are a little bit better. Or, in some places, in some restaurants, the benefits don't exist. I would say those are probably some of the bigger aspects, the bigger differences in working from a hotel to a restaurant. But I will say, on the flip side, some of the negative aspects of working in a hotel is, if you're the type of chef that likes to run your operation with 100% authority and the final call, it's not necessarily that way in a hotel. There's a lot of people with a vested interest in the decisions that are made, right? Everything from the sales department to, a catering department to, from the culinary team as well. So it's more of a collaborative effort. Of course, ultimately, it's my say on whatever decided on the food, but I do take a lot of other factors in when making the decision.
But, if you look back, let's say 25 years or so ago, young people wanted to work in hotels. And you explained to me when we met that it was, and you can talk about this further, but it was really because of the image that most of the European chefs were working at hotels. So there was a big influence there. And then the trends shifted in wanting to be a chef at a private restaurants. Why?
So when I went to culinary school, and even before I went to culinary school, and it was part of the influence that I had, we didn't really have the Food Network. It didn't exist. And the cookbooks back then were not necessarily like the cookbooks are now. You didn't have so many chefs pumping out cookbooks. The cookbooks were really recipe books with a couple of pictures, where now they're picture books with a couple of recipes, or idea books, right? So the one television program that everyone really turns to was this TV show called Great Chefs of the World, or Great Chefs of America or US. I don't remember what it was called. But when you would watch these shows, right, as a young cook, you would say, okay, these are the people that I want to work for, because these are the people on TV. And these people on this television program were, the chef at the Waldorf Astoria, or, the chef of some other luxury hotel in Beverly Hills, or the chef of some inn in France or something like that, right? So you always saw these hotel chefs or these chefs in country clubs doing these demos of this interesting food. So when you went to culinary school, all your instructors, for the most part, came from hotels and country clubs and would talk them up. And then you watch the TV, and the narrative on TV is, you want to be a great chef, because that was the title of the show, Great Chefs. You want to be a great chef, you work in these great hotels. So what the culinary schools were pumping out at that point in time was, if you want to be a great chef, go work in a great hotel. So everyone in culinary school, it was the exact opposite back then. When people would talk, where are you going to go work after graduation? It was, I'm going to go work at this hotel, or I'm going to go work at that hotel. And the people that worked in restaurants were kind of looked upon as, why would you go work at a restaurant? Because it's probably an American chef in the restaurant, where you could go work under a German or an Austrian or a French chef in a hotel or a country club, where you could really learn more, right? So a couple of years later, Food Network comes out, Emerald's on there, and then you start to see this explosion of the American chef. Cookbooks start to evolve. The shift was gradual, but I would say by 2008, 2010, no one was really wanting to work in hotels as much as they wanted to work in restaurants. So it was interesting for me to see that shift happen, where everyone wanted to work in a hotel to now everyone wants to work in a restaurant. I think a lot of that had to do with, the influence of the Food Network and the media and shows like Top Chef and whatnot coming from these great restaurants. And what you saw was you kind of saw the end of an era of the great hotel chef, these great European chefs that were working in hotels. So there was a changing of the guard. And, quite honestly, what you saw was the emergence of the American chef in these hotels. And to be honest with you, maybe that is why the hotels struggled for a bit with the reputation, is because the American chefs probably hadn't finished their training. They probably weren't ready to run the kitchens the way the European chefs had at the time. So there was a bit of a lag. Meanwhile, the restaurants seem to have figured it out. Now I think things are starting to shift a little bit, especially when you think about the expenses that it takes to operate your own restaurant as opposed to in a hotel. It is expensive to operate a restaurant in a hotel. It's just a different dynamic because the hotel is supported by rooms revenue. So it's just a different way to look at things. And I think what we're trying to do here is bring back that level of professionalism and that level of cuisine back to hotels.
To the young people that are in culinary school at the moment, and they are looking at their future and, where it could be in a hotel and in a restaurant. So what advice can you give, to a young person interested in becoming a chef and maybe, becoming a chef at a hotel?
It's really easy to think short term, and get the reward now. I would ask young people to just think a little bit bigger and think, where do you want to be in your career, 10, 15, 20 years from now? Are you going to have a family? Are you going to have children? Are you looking for balance of life? Are you looking to make more money? And a lot of these questions, it's better off answering early in your career, because if you spend the majority of your career in a restaurant, and then one day you want to transition to a hotel because of benefits, or you want to make a little bit more money, or whatever the case may be, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to make that transition. So I would, to each their own. Maybe one day you want to own your own restaurant. You're never going to learn about operating your own restaurant by working in a hotel. You'll learn some things, but you won't learn everything. However, you'll never learn about operating a hotel if you've only worked in restaurants. So I would say getting a good mix of experience and understanding the differences between the two is important. But I would say the most important thing is to not limit yourself and to understand there may be a day in the future where maybe a couple of restaurants have closed on you, or you've been shorted a couple of paychecks, or whatever the case may be, or you need insurance, or you have kids. The hotel might be the right answer for you, and it shouldn't be frowned upon to work in a hotel when you're trying to support yourself or support your family, because quite honestly, that's why we're all in this business, right? I mean, we're in it for passion, but at the end of the day, it's a means of how we live.
Let's go back a little bit now to a creative process. So you have this wide number of platforms at the Fairmont in Austin. So I'm curious, how do you go about creating dishes, for such a diverse menus that you have, from the high-end table restaurant to the Italian and the Asian ones? And, where is your inspiration coming from for, all those platforms that you have?
Well, we have a really large and talented team. So I would say the first and foremost, it's collaboration. There's a lot of people that have great ideas, and we're always discussing food and bouncing ideas off each other. Someone from Garrison could be talking to someone in review and get inspiration that way or whatever. But I would say that probably first and foremost, it's the collaborative amongst the different chefs that work here. Everyone's always spinning ideas. Me personally, how I come up with my ideas is really, I like to be alone. I like to think. I like to put on some classical music, drink some green tea, zone out, and then I like to write. And then from there, that's where the ideas start to flow. So for me, and everyone has a different creative process, but for me, the creative process is a lot of times done in isolation. But a lot of the ideas that spring forth from isolation come from collaborative discussions that I've had prior.
And then when you generate those ideas, on your own. Then after that, you're going back to like your team and then, share this, and they do the same with their own ideas. So that's the whole collaborative approach as well, continuing.
Absolutely. So a lot of the chefs, before I took this call, I was downstairs tasting some Thai food with my chef de cuisine that he brought forward and say, hey, what do you think of these flavors? It has this fish sauce caramel and fresh herbs. And we're discussing it, and it's great. It's delicious. Can we add a little bit more heat, or can we add a little bit, some texture and add some roasted peanuts on top or something like that? So there's always something for me to try. There's always someone working on a dish, and then it gets put in front of me. I put my opinion on it. The chef will take it back, work on it a little bit more, or it might be the other way around. I might get an idea, work on a dish, and then maybe bring my chef de cuisine or my executive sous chef over and say, hey, what do you think about this? I wouldn't say that there's a straight line on how we create the dishes. Sometimes it's from a discussion. Sometimes it's just from something that we tasted. But in this operation where we have so many moving parts, in a day, I'm trying 3 or 4 new dishes every day.
Is the original step coming from like the produce that you guys are working on and linked to like the local, or let's say the seasonal ingredients available? Does it come from like a memory? Does it come from something that you have read on a cooking book, or, so what's the first step for you?
Well, it depends on the restaurant. So like in Garrison, we have our top line objectives, right? So there should be an element of smoke. There should be some finesse in the technique, and so we want to start there. And then it should be seasonal. It should make sense to what we're doing. So when the seasons change and we update our menu, obviously we're going to incorporate, seasonal ingredients, and what can we get from local farms, and how can we utilize the whole plant or the whole animal to make sure that we really reduce the amount of waste that we have in a specific dish. So in Garrison, I would say it's more of the traditional approach, right? So we look at the season, we look at what's available locally, and then we look at, the concept and make sure that it fits. But in Review, it's completely different, because the creative process in Review might not be driven as much seasonally, because if we're speaking of Italian food, the idea comes from what's the tradition? What's the tradition of this dish? Where does this pizza come from? Or where does this pasta come from? Where does the shape come from? So we're looking more for our inspiration in that restaurant based on tradition. Same thing with the Asian dishes that we do, right? So when we look at our ramen, we have 3 types of ramen on the menu that are all based off of tonkatsu broth. So when we make the broth and we make the ramen, and we have the shio, the shoyu, and a miso ramen, all based off of tonkatsu broth. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily a seasonal dish, right? It's ramen, and it's made in its traditional style. So in some cases, it's a very creative process, and let's put our personality in the dish. And in other cases, it's let's respect the tradition of this type of cuisine.
So this hotel, opened the doors a little bit more than a year now, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then, so when we met not too long ago, he told me an interesting story when you started and about the challenge you guys faced at the time, because the hotel, were opening a bit, like late. It was a little bit delayed. You had a freshly formed team, that you just hired. And you told me a story how you went about working, on the first menu. So I would like you to tell us this story now.
We were supposed to open, and prior to opening, there was just 2 chefs that were hired, as myself and Atticus, who's my right hand over here. And we wrote all the menus. We wrote all the menus for Garrison, Review, bar, room service. We were ready to go. So when the first 8 chefs started, it was a mad sprint, because we needed to open up, and we didn't have a kitchen, right? So we're working out of an office building, and we had nowhere to cook, but we needed to create these recipes, because at this point they were just ideas on a piece of paper. What we did was we rented an Airbnb. Someone was crazy enough to let us make all the dishes in their house. So we went through about 500 dishes, right? When you think about the hotel and all the dishes that we had to create, and many of them never made it on the menu. So for about a month and a half, we had to create these 500 dishes, document the recipes, take pictures, and you had 8 chefs basically working over a 4-burner stove.
Wow.
Creating,
that's insane.
about 20 dishes a day, taking photos, writing down the recipes, tasting, and then going back to the drawing board when we needed to. And so this was an early collaboration. So we had, the Jason Purcell, who's our chef of Garrison, our chef of Review, Matthew Schaefer at the time, Atticus, our banquet chef, our in-room dining chef, our pastry chef. And we're all working out of this house, creating dishes. And the influence was amazing because a lot of the chefs had different walks of life. One chef came from the Thomas Keller restaurant group. Another chef came from Le Bernardin. Another guy came from the Danielle system. So when everyone was coming together and we're talking pasta, for example, one chef is saying, oh, this is how we made it at TKRG. This is another guy saying, this is how we made it at Le Bernardin. Or this is how we made it at Danielle. Or this is how I made it at my restaurant. And then we'd all come together and say, okay, this is the best way that we think it's to be made here. And what ended up, a lot of the recipes were just this amalgamation of different ideas and different iterations of the dish before we said, okay, that's it. That's perfect. That's the best way that we could execute it for our particular operation. So a little over a month later and 500 dishes later, we're ready to go and we're ready to open. There was a delay. So the mad sprint wasn't as needed as much as we went. But I'll tell you what, it was a creative time in my life that I would say it was an invaluable experience, not only for me, but all the other chefs that were a part of that creative process.
Exactly.
If you could think back when you could make 500 dishes with your closest friends, it was an amazing
And maybe
time.
you just gave another idea for Airbnb.
Yeah.
To expand their business.
Yeah. Use it as a test kitchen.
Exactly. So when you're looking back at your career in the hotel, restaurant before and so on, so what are you the most proud of?
I think what I'm most proud of as a chef is the people that I've worked under me, the different people that I've seen come up from a cook right out of culinary school, or maybe even a cook with no culinary school that maybe grows into a sous chef position or an executive chef position or a chef de cuisine position. I would say that really the investment in the people and mentoring people and seeing them grow is probably what I'm most proud of. I'm most proud of the people that I've worked with. There's no personal accomplishment that I have that I would say is greater than the accomplishment in investing in people. It's probably been, the greatest reward in my career.
And you are as well a mentor, correct?
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm a member of the Mentor BKB organization, which really is a big supporter of the Bocuse d'Or Foundation. And they select a competitor every 2 years to go to the Bocuse d'Or, and they help train them and find them and support them. But Mentor also helps chefs finding culinary grants to go work in great restaurants around the world. And it brings chefs together for these collaborative events. And I mean, it's a really fantastic organization that definitely is something that I'm very proud to be a part of with some other great, amazing chefs. It's definitely something that if people aren't aware, should definitely look into.
So who are the chefs that you look up to and why?
There's a lot of chefs that I look up to, but I would say, the chef that I admire the most is probably, Thomas Keller, just for what he's been able to do as a professional with his career, with his legacy. Really what impresses me the most about him is the amount of chefs that have kind of come from his lineage. When you think about all the other great Michelin 3-star chefs that have worked under him, or, Matthew Peters being the first American to win the Bocuse d'Or, Philippe Tessier, who won silver, or, what Grant Achatz has created, a restaurant empire.
Well, I had on the show, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. So So you could trace a lot of these chefs back to Thomas Keller. And as far as an American chef goes, I can't think of another one that has produced as many great chefs as Thomas Keller. And I think that's why I admire him the most. As I said, what makes me most proud is the chefs that have worked under me. So I think that's why I admire him very much.
You talked to me about, other people, for their creativity. I think that you mentioned like Rene Redzepi as well.
I would say for sure, if you think about a forward-thinking chef, I would say that Rene Redzepi definitely is someone that definitely I like to read everything that he puts out, every cookbook. I was just wrapping up reading his fermentation book that he just put out. He's very creative. He's definitely started a lot of movements for today's chef. Everything from foraging to what he talks about, time and place, to his fermentation projects that he's doing, to moving his restaurant around the world and doing a Noma pop-up in Australia or Mexico. So I definitely think he's on the forefront. And I would say I'm very curious to see what his legacy will be, because obviously, I think he's the current generation's Thomas Keller, I would say.
And anyone in Texas?
Yeah, for sure. I think, the chef that I admire most in Texas is probably Dean Faring at the chef of Faring's at the Ritz-Carlton. He's just such a down-to-earth chef, complete gentleman. but really understands the marketing and business aspect of it and really understands his customer. And I would say, from a chef that gets it and from a chef that really has the complete package from marketing to mentorship to business savvy and just being a shrewd businessman, I think Dean Ferring is probably the guy that I would say I admire most here in Texas.
So you are managing more than 100 people at the Fairmont Hotel. How would you describe your leadership style?
It's evolved over time. And I would say that now, if you've ever seen the movie Goodfellas, you'll remember Paulie, and there's a scene when they're talking about Paulie and Goodfellas, and Paulie's whispering in people's ear, and it's just kind of this messenger relaying it. I would say that now my leadership style is probably like that. I kind of talk to my executive sous chef or my chef de cuisine. I'll whisper in their ears, and they'll take it from there. But I would say when I see a young cook in the kitchen, I really like to spend time with them and really talk to them and explain things to them and coach them through. So the way that I work with someone that's brand new in the kitchen sometimes is different than how I work with someone that's very experienced in the kitchen. I just hold them maybe to a different standard. A younger person, I want to make sure that they really understand the lesson, because I forget that they potentially don't know much about this business or this industry.
So you said it evolved over time. So do you want to mention a little bit, how it was before?
Yeah, so I would say that early on in my career, most of the chefs that I worked under, and it was just a matter of time. This is for the most part, and I hate to use this excuse and say, well, that's just the way kitchens were. But the truth is that every kitchen that I was in and every kitchen that I was a part of, that's the way they were. They were explosive. The chef was angry. The chef was hard on everyone. I saw things. I saw physical abuse in the kitchen, or yelling, or verbal abuse. It was very common. And so when that's all and that's all that's accepted, I would say early on in my career that I would say that I probably could have been a better manager with that, because I would say that maybe I was that way as well. And so as time evolved and as I started to really see the type of results I was getting, I had an epiphany moment. And that was one of my sous chefs, female. She had a friend coming into the restaurant that she was cooking for. I backed off and I was letting her cook for her friend. And I was watching her run around the kitchen and yell at everyone, "Oh, you're burning my sauce," or, "Hey, you're not cooking my chicken correctly." And she's just being very aggressive. And as I'm watching this, I'm scared. I'm intimidated. I'm like, "Oh man, this is very uncomfortable for me to watch." Right. And what was interesting about the whole thing is this person was one of the sweetest people I knew. And so it was interesting for me to see how they had turned this corner, and they were this sweet, innocent chef was now this tyrant. And I'm watching it go down. And I thought to myself, that's how I am. And so the light bulb went off, because she wasn't that way. She was that way because that's probably how I was, but I was completely oblivious to my own behavior, right? I wasn't really self-aware, which that was really the beginning of me understanding who I was and what I needed to become to evolve myself and to evolve as a chef in this industry.
So this is the moment where you reconcile the idea of you, the chef, and you, the Andre, the person, correct?
Yeah, I would say that there was definitely a duality going on here, because Andre, the person, is this very happy-go-lucky, friendly man that would help anyone out when they're in a time of need. However, Andre, the chef, was maybe a little bit more serious, a little bit more stern, a lot more disciplined, and definitely had zero tolerance for mistakes. And so people that knew me as a chef would say, "Wow, he's a really hard chef." And then people that knew me as a person would say, "What are you talking about? He's the nicest guy we know." And I realized that there was a point where I had to find some sort of compromise between the two. I had to understand that Andre the chef and Andre the person could be one and the same. And it took some time for me to really evolve into this type of chef, and realizing that in order for me to get better results, I had to look back on my career and say, okay, why was I more successful in certain places than other places? And what it really boiled down to was the places where I was happier in my job were the places that I was more successful. So I realized that there was a direct correlation with my attitude and my view on things and my leadership style to the results that we were given. It had nothing to do with my culinary ability. And that's when I really realized that I needed to reconcile these two aspects of my personality.
But at the same time, discipline is very important in the kitchen, and especially when you are running, this huge, organization that you have under you. So why discipline is, so important, and what does it bring?
I'll tell you why discipline's important, but I think first it's important that we understand the context in which we use the word discipline, because the word discipline sometimes can mean that you're in trouble. So we're going to discipline this person because they're not doing something the way we want them to do it. Another way to use the word discipline is to say, I have the discipline to work out every day. You're not in trouble, right? But you have the discipline to do something because it's something that's going to yield a better result, right? So understanding the difference, and this was something that I had to understanding the difference between discipline as punishment and discipline as a means to deliver a result because it's the right thing. I had to understand that in order to have a disciplined kitchen, it wasn't that I had to be mean to anyone. It was just that I had to expect consistency from everyone in the most minute detail. And that's really where I understood the process of discipline is turning down the noise so you could really focus on what's important. So the discipline to do something consistently, whether that was folding their towels a certain way or answering a question a certain way or putting their knife a certain place or cutting chives a certain way. There had to be a certain amount of discipline in the way that we do things. And when things aren't done with that discipline in mind, they get corrected. But they don't have to be corrected in a manner which is belittling to the person. They're corrected in a way of, that's not how we do it. This is how we do it. And here's why we do it this way. And after a while, the person understands.
So you mentioned answering the question a certain way. And when I was with you and you very kindly gave me the whole tour of like the behind the scene tour at the Fairmont, that was very impressive. So thank you for doing this. I noticed that every member of your personnel that we were meeting, when you asked there the questions, and greeting them and how they were doing, they all had the same positive attitude and phrase when they answer. Can you please share with us the phrase they said and how is it part of this, your philosophy?
Whenever we come and go here at work, we always shake in and we shake out. We start the day as a professional, we end the day as a professional. So every cook that comes into the kitchen, or anybody that comes into the kitchen for that matter, every cook is going to shake their hand. So we start out that way. And when the question is asked, how are you? The response is always awake and ready. And the reason that is because it's very easy to get lost in what's happening outside of work. And we all have troubles and we all have things going on. But when we're at work, what we need to do is we need to refocus on what we're doing. So the answer of awake and ready, to me and to all the chefs in there, really what it's saying is we're present, we're focused, and we're ready for service, or we're ready for whatever challenges come at us today in the operation. And we're here, we're present. Versus, oh, today, I had a flat tire and my cat is, got lost or, whatever the case may be. So it just trains the cooks to kind of turn down that noise a little bit and allows them to focus a lot more on the task at hand. So the answer is awake and ready. Someone asks you, how are you today? Everyone says awake and ready.
I was in fact ready when, we started like the discussion for this podcast, and I was expecting you to ask me how I was doing, and I was ready to answer awake and ready, chef. But it didn't happen.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's fine. What are the best parts of being a chef?
I would say one, you get to have delicious food all the time. So that's always probably the biggest perk. But I would say there's a lot of great parts. But I would say right now in my career, it's about leadership. It's about mentorship. It's about developing others. That's a great part of being a chef. But the other great part, because there's times when I don't want to be a leader. There's times when I don't want to be a mentor. And maybe I just want to stand at a cutting board and chop all day, or I want to skim stock, or, one of these menial tasks that, I've done for many years throughout my career. And what's great about those tasks is it almost puts you in this meditative state. I could just sit there and chop onions for a few hours and I don't have to think about anything. And for me, that's a good way for me to relax. And that's a good way for me to unwind, is just to do these repetitive tasks. That's something that I like to do to unwind a little bit. But I think the greatest thing is just, being creative and working with lots of different people and really having an impact on people's lives.
For the people that are listening, we know that there is as well a dark side, of being a chef. It's a tough job. It's not solely about the creativity and the glamour, that you see on TV. There's long hours, there's no weekends. It's a difficult life and work balance. You can have bad reviews, from food critics and multiple types of addictions. A lot of chefs today, share their life experience. So you genuinely shared with me, when we met, a challenging moment in your career. And these moments, are a reality and part of the life of being a chef. So I don't want you to go into too much details, but I think it will be interesting for the people listening and maybe people that are in culinary school or that are young chefs. I would love if you could talk to us about them and how you overcame them.
I think how it all started was with a little bit of fame. It's the classic story that you hear so much is you get a little bit of accolades, and then you start to believe what's being written about you, and then you associate your identity with the press that you're getting or the accolades that you receive. What started to happen to me is, which something that I never thought would happen to me. I always thought that I was definitely separate from Andre the chef. I definitely thought Andre and Andre the chef are two different people. But I was involved in this restaurant, and as we got a bad review, which affected the restaurant, which affected the people that worked there. So we had to change concepts, and little by little, things just kept getting worse and worse with the press and what was being written. It started to affect all the other areas of my life, and so I couldn't disassociate what was being written with who I was. And so eventually these restaurants closed. It was a big blow to my ego. It was a big blow to, to my friends and my family. And I went through, I went through some dark times because of it. It took me some time. So that's one of the reasons why I moved to Austin. I just kind of wanted to get away from Dallas and food critics and, for lack of a better term, stick my head in the sand and just get back to work without having to worry about the pressure of what the media is writing about you. Because I was still very much attached to the idea of me and the person that's being written about. But it took me a minute to really understand that if I had 100 different people write about me, I would have 100 different perspectives on who I am. But the fact of the matter is none of those perspectives are who I am. It's who they think I am. And so I had to take a step back and realize that what is being written, good, bad, or indifferent, is not me. It's their perception of me or their perception of the product. It took me a moment, but I would say it was very freeing to understand that I was more than just a chef, that the chef was just what I did, but it wasn't who I am. After a few years of just kind of being upset about whether it was a food critic or a bad review, I was able to kind of put that behind me and move forward. And it was difficult. I thought it would be a lot easier. I may have judged other people harshly when they went through a hard time, not understanding why they got so wrapped up in what was written. But when it was staring at me in the face, I had to look at it and say, wow, it's a lot harder than I thought it was to deal with this pressure. So I was glad I went through it because I was able to understand who I was and able to reconcile those two different aspects of my personality.
But I think, thank you for sharing. But I think it's very important as well for, people that are out there that are food critics, or I would to say, like, everyone seems to be a food critic now with all the technology that we have, and everyone is able to write a review. But, sometimes that has consequences and impact, not only on the chef, but as well on the whole ecosystems, of the restaurants, because you are not the only one at the restaurant. There's people working there. There are family attached to it. I think it's very, very important to understand that before writing anything, think about, the consequences of your actions.
I agree. And you have to think about the amount of money that's invested into a place. If a restaurant costs a little bit over $1 million to open, that's a big financial investment. When you think about all the people that are employed there and, maybe they have 2 or 3 dependents, this is a big impact. Sometimes you're talking hundreds of people that are impacted by a bad review. And sometimes those bad reviews have an agenda. Maybe they're just being written about because they don't like a particular person, or maybe there's a critic feud, or maybe it's just not the popular opinion, or maybe they're trying to spin a certain narrative a certain way to make something else more trendy. So there's a lot of different reasons, but the impact that this has on people's lives, I think, is something that's not discussed enough. And when we talk about having a positive mental outlook, and chefs that have mental health issues, whether it's abusing substances or whatnot, a lot of this is based upon the pressures that one has to support all these people that are tied to the restaurant, whether it's investors, whether it's their own money, whether it's the families of others who are their employees. There's a lot of pressure on a chef to perform. And I'm not sure people recognize that. I think people just go in and say, I was too salty, I'll never go back there, and not understanding that we're dealing with people, that we're going to have mistakes in restaurants, and things aren't always going to come out perfectly.
And if it's so salty, it's just easy to give a feedback, to the waiter or to the chef, and that's it, and move on.
Right. And not understanding that some of this negative feedback, what are the consequences that it has on certain people, which, in some places they could afford the negative feedback and maybe they thrive off of it, but other places it makes the doors close and people lose jobs. So I think there has to be a little bit more responsibility with this and understanding the larger consequences that go in with negative reviews, whether it's Yelp or local critics.
Sure. So thank you, Chef, for sharing this with us. Now let's go into like a more light, discussion. And I always ask, the chef to come up with, a suggestion around like maybe a common ingredients and give an inspiration and a suggestion for the home cook. So we talked about selecting eggplants. There was a lot of interesting dishes that I tasted, on your menu that the chance to come to Austin. So what would you suggest, for people, how they can prepare, eggplants at home with a creative twist?
The way we prepare our eggplants here is we confit them, some oil, and then we grill them. I really like the technique of confitting them in some sort of fat. Now, this is where you could get creative. So if you have the technique of confitting the eggplant in fat, well, then you could change your medium up. So you could use olive oil, or you could use, a neutral oil, but you could also use duck fat. You could use tallow, beef tallow. You could maybe use chicken schmaltz to confit your eggplant, so you could impart some of that meaty flavor. So to me, this is kind of where the ideas are coming from right now. And then after it's confit, and of course you could add your aromats in there. So, bay leaves or citrus or whatever the case may be. And then I would take that. And then if you don't have a grill, we have a wood burning grill. So I take the eggplants and I put it on the grill, but during the summer or spring, great for barbecuing. But maybe you could put that in a cast iron pan and get some caramelization on there. And then just serving it with a beautiful sauce. In our case here, we do a romesco sauce, but a salsa verde or something like that, or a chimichurri would lend itself very well to that grilled smoky charred eggplant and really creamy on the inside with because it's been confit in some fat. That's what I would do with it.
So when you are saying confit, so that means that you are really letting like the eggplant cook very slowly into like the different fats that you mentioned, correct?
Yeah, so I would say probably the basic technique would be to submerge the eggplant in some form of fat. That would be your cooking medium. So duck fat, olive oil, beef tallow doesn't matter. And then maybe cook it slowly in the oven at low temperature until it's very, very soft. Maybe a little bit more than an hour.
Okay, so we don't count the calories for that dish, correct?
No.
We indulge.
Yes.
That's what we do. Okay, good. So I was looking at the time and I'm like, wow, we talked like for more than 50 minutes already. So I would like to finish the interview with a series of rapid fire questions. So where do you eat where you are off the clock and you are not at home? And of course, not in any of the restaurants at the Fairmont.
Some of my favorite places. I eat often at Ramen Tatsuya. I love Emmer and Rye. Chef Kevin Fink does an amazing job down there. Olame with Michael Fotiger. Juniper with Nick Yanis. Those are probably my top picks in Austin right now.
What are the top 3 cookbooks that inspired you the most?
I would say probably the French Laundry Cookbook was probably my most inspirational book. Alain Ducasse's Grand Livre de Cuisine was probably another one that was a big influence for me. And then, something modern right now that I would say is influencing me is probably this Noma fermentation book. I think it's pretty incredible.
Can you give me 3 dishes you could not live without cooking or eating?
Ooh, tacos. I would say.
What kind of tacos? Come on.
I love pastor, chicharron, and maybe barbacoa. I would say those are probably the tacos that I eat the most. So that's probably 1. 2, I love a perfect roasted chicken. Simple, delicious. And then 3, a simple grilled fish. Just a simple grilled fish with lemon. Fill in the blank depending on what the time of year is.
What's your favorite guilty pleasure food?
I probably eat a lot of nacho cheese Doritos. Probably more than I should.
Okay, I bring you a bag next time I come over. What's the first things you do when you leave the restaurant?
When I leave the restaurant, I jump in my car. I think about what audiobook or podcast that I'm listening to. And
of course, Flavors Unknown.
Yes. I try to make a long drive because that's the only alone time I have is in the car listening to something, because when I'm at work, I'm chef, and when I'm at home, I'm dad. So it's the only time when I'm no one's boss.
Very good. And finally, what does Austin's restaurant scene lack or need more of today?
I would say that we have a very strong middle to high end. I think what we need is a stronger luxury presence. So, having great chefs come to the city and develop luxury concepts, I think is something that's lacking, especially when we want to be considered in as a direct competitor some primary markets like New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco. I think we need 1 or 2 of these very high-end luxury restaurants.
Okay. Thank you, Chef. I really appreciate your genuine, participation to the podcast. I thank you very much for reaching out to me through the Flavors Unknown Instagram and to, just wave and say, hey, I'm here and I'm listening to your podcast, and I think that we should connect. So thank you for doing this. I had a tremendous experience in Austin, in the Fairmont, in Garrison, and I'm looking forward to come back. In fact, very soon down to Austin and continue the exchange with you.
Well, I'm looking forward to welcoming you back to Austin, and thank you for having me on the podcast.
Before I let you go, 2 things. Number 1, have you subscribed to this podcast? If you haven't, make sure you click on the subscribe button wherever you are listening to this podcast, because you do not want to miss an episode. And talking about this, number 2, the next episode will be with Chef David Burke from New Jersey, New York, and you do not want to miss this one. I see you in 2 weeks, and until then, remember that people who love to eat are always the best people.
Thanks for listening to Flavors Unknown. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a review. Find the show notes at flavorsunknown.com. And if you want to join the Flavors Unknown community, search Flavors Unknown on Instagram and Twitter.